like I said, some of this stuff is going to go faster, so I apologize for taking so long, but some of it you're hearing for the first time. Some of it, if you've been around a little bit, you know more about it. It all helps. So we just finished up inspections. I'll tell you, inspections are one of the ways we make our money. All right, so we do a lot of work for people, and this is just one of the ways. I'm not going to get into negotiating inspection results and all that. That's for another class that we host. But what I will tell you is back to, you recognizing things and suggesting maybe the inspections they get and that sort of stuff. So your options on inspections are, you can get, the buyer can get everything and anything inspected they want. There's a tipping point of reasonableness of cost that they want to invest versus how much they want to learn about the house. So you can get a whole house inspector to check out the property. They know a little bit about most things in the house. Think of them kind of like the general physician or practitioner or country doctor, right? They know a little bit about most things. You can get a whole house inspector. You could get separate individual inspections done. They do a much deeper dive in that individual component. But if you're only getting individual components inspected, who looks in the attic? Who checks out the windows? There's all these spaces in between that the home inspector generally gets. So what I do sometimes is recommend, say, a whole house inspection to cover most things. But then if there's that I see that's suspect, the buyer sees the suspect, or is really critical, like somebody that says, I have to have a fireplace in the house. I won't buy a house unless it's got a good fireplace. Well, I order a whole house inspection plus a separate fireplace inspector because that is really important to them. Or if I see a suspect roof, I might order a whole house inspection, which will look at the roof, but they'll take kind of a I don't want to say superficial, but just a general look at it, and a separate roofer, and a separate electrician or a plumber, some of those types of things. A whole house inspection does not cover like a wood destroying insect, termites and carpenter ants, or radon. Those inspectors will do those inspections, but it's a la carte, it's an add-on, okay? But whatever the case is, like I said, this is what part of the services we're providing to people. I had a client once who was an engineer, and he bought a property sight unseen. And it was during the pandemic times. He was coming from California and knew he was not going to see this property. Not until closing, but long after closing was when he was going to arrive. And if you know much about engineers or accountants or architects, those are detail-oriented professions. Accountants, all of that. So they like detail. They like to get into the weeds on everything. And so you got to be tolerant of people's personalities when you're involved in contracts and doing things. And you got to be willing to adapt your stance on things and roll with it. For instance, this guy that I said, I gave him his options on inspections, and he wanted to know this property up one side and down the other. He is somebody that I've never had so many inspections through. One of the forms we're going to get to in a little bit is I told you in this form, in the contract, we do not itemize which inspections they want in this form. Here are the ideas, but we do it on a different form. And this was my client's inspection request, all right? And if you're familiar with looking at this sheet, this one will make your head spin, all right? He wanted the whole house inspection, which is right here. So he said, okay, give me the whole house inspection. But then I want a wood destroying. I want a separate person for heating and cooling. I want somebody different. So he wanted it all. Like I said, he's an engineer, great guy. He was very reasonable to work with, but he wanted everything checked out, all right? He was all about the information. And so This takes a lot of work. I'm here to tell you. So if you're, like I said, if you were accustomed to ordering inspections and seeing this form, this visual would make your head spin. So he wanted all the way down to some things that weren't even listed on here. So I crossed out volatile organic chemicals and nitrates. Those are part of the water test, and just he wanted inspections on environmental things like mold and asbestos. He wanted to know if there was lead in the water, right? The chimney, I already went over some of that. Radon survey, there's no pool, but he wanted to know what the trees and landscapes were going on around the property and the lead-based paint. And it's like, oh my gosh, who do I find for all this stuff? It was making my head spin and creating a great deal of work. But I told you, this is what we do. So I'll use this as a good one example, this trees and landscape. I found a guy that does work for me, and I said, hey, can you do me a favor and go on out? And he's a licensed arborist, so he knows his stuff. I said, I need you to go on out and just identify all the plants around this house. So that's what he did. He went out, this is his drawing, and he's just went through and he identified. I think he probably found it was fun. I don't know, this guy's a sick individual, but he would go around and do all of that. and then he wrote it all on. He did all that for $100. I thought that was a great deal. Like I said, I think part of it he just saw as a challenge. And he did give some quotes for doing some cleanup work, some things that needed to be done. But my guy really appreciated that. He's like, yes, Quinn, that is exactly what I'm looking for. All right. Back.
So that little add-on for the inspections, do you need that when you submit the purchase agreement?
You don't need it no, you do not need this form when you do the purchase agreement, but you're going to want it very shortly thereafter. Yeah, you've got it in your packet. We're going to go over it here in a moment. But I was just giving you an example of ordering inspections and all the rest of that. All right? All right, so back to our contract. All right, so many days to get things done. And so home warranty program, one may or may not be included in the sale. So what is a home warranty program? Home warranties are an insurance policy that protect against mechanical related things. So the furnace, the air conditioner, the water heater, the appliances, some electric, some plumbing. Like any other, so mechanical related things, not a hole in the roof or a hole in the wall, all right? And they will cover a buyer for the first 12 months that they own a property. And the cost is right around $700, let's say, in today's world. And so it used to be far more regular that they were part of our sales. But now in the world where there was multiple buyers, they didn't want to saddle the seller with the cost of a home inspection. And so oftentimes they've been bypassed. Here again, though, do not make that choice for them. That is a choice that do you want a home warranty or not? Here's what it is. And so get used to explaining what a home warranty is.
Is it really $700 now?
Yeah. They're expensive. But I told you it covers mechanical related things. It covers for the buyer for the first 12 months. There are some home warranties that will cover the seller to a limited extent during the listing period. Like any other insurance company, there's a deductible. They call it a trade call fee. So the first $100 is the owner to pick up or whoever's calling out. And if it is a covered item, right, so they first go out and they'll try to repair it at first. If they can't repair it, they'll replace it, provided it's a covered item. But like any other insurance company, they're very specific about where their coverage begins and where their coverage ends. For instance, it might cover a derelict or faulty water heater. All right, so yes, we will cover the replacement of that water heater. However, the piping coming to and from the water heater is not up to code. And we can't install this water heater unless that stuff's fixed. So we will fix it, but you're going to pick up the cost of that. The home warranty company will pick up the cost of the water heater. Do you get what I'm saying? Their coverage begins and ends at specific spots. So I think home warranties are good. They are an added layer of protection or risk reduction, right? So somebody buys a $300,000 house, they move in, and the next thing that happens, they buy it in March or April. They move in, and the first time they hit the air conditioner in the first warm day of May, it doesn't kick on. And, they're going to be a little, as I said, salty about paying $300,000 house. First time they go to use the AC, it doesn't work. Now we're out even more money. If you have that in place, it may not be foolproof coverage, but it is some kind of coverage. All right? Once again, buyer is at work. Air conditioner doesn't turn on. They turn to their coworker, say, "Wouldn't you know, we just closed on this house a month ago and the air conditioner's not working." And the coworker says, "Well, turn it into a home warranty company." And they say, "What's a home warranty?" Right? And so if you have not done a good job of explaining it and getting them to sign off on certain things, they're like, you never offered this to us. All right? All right.
So where do we find the home warranty?
In our office, it's going to be right up in that flex room where the food was. We got a whole drawer for marketing materials and things like that. At the Elkhart and Goshen office, they will have a spot where they will have a warranty.
And what was the 700? That's the fee. It used to be 450.
That's the cost of the coverage.
And there's different companies and they're all start at 700?
No, they'll vary. There's a few companies and they'll vary in price, but they've had a lot of claims over the years, and so their costs have gone up. You'll get to know one or two of them. American Home Shield's one, and there's probably a couple more I know.
And back in the day, again, we went through with the inspector, everything was fine. The minute they closed it, within a week, the furnace went out and it got replaced. Again, somebody with a pool, they jumped in the pool, the pump didn't work, they got it replaced. So for the first time home buyer, it's almost like, okay, I just need to know that if something really bad happens, so basically it's for their own.
It helps. It's an added layer of security, but
Just run it by them if they say no.
there's a
If
cost to
you
it.
don't say anything like Quinn said, then you're really
Yeah.
SOL.
Yep.
Do they need to do an inspection?
They don't have to do an inspection. No. You mean the home warranty company?
Yeah.
No, the home warranty company will not do it. Now, if they come in and this piece of equipment clearly has been out of function, it has not been working for a long period of time, they may not cover it. They were like, yeah, you bought this knowing this was a problem. So there does sometimes get a gray area or a pushback in certain areas. But if, to your point, I use that air conditioner example because during the home inspection or any inspection, they will not run the air conditioner if it's below 65 degrees out, ambient temperature outside, right? If they hit the switch on that compressor that's outside, right, they could damage it if the outside temperature is too low. So you don't know if that air conditioner works until the first warm day in spring, and you go to hit the button. All right. Okay, so that's home warranties. Don't automatically assume there will not be one. All right. Okay, so disclosures. So you're going to recognize receipt of the seller's disclosure form. We'll go over that here in a minute, as well as receipt of the lead-based paint form. So those ought to be attached as documents, attached documents to the listing. I don't know if my thing's still up here or not. This doesn't have it, but the others, I should have it here. Maybe I got it. I don't have that up there. I should. Oh, this one does not have a disclosure because it's one of those exempt properties. Who can remember what are the exempt properties of a seller's disclosure form? Take a guess. Even if you. That is not one of them. That is not an exempt property. No, you guys are really coming up with some interesting ideas, though. Nope. An estate. Who said estate? Yeah, somebody remembers. That's right, because the people handling the estate presumably have never lived in the house, so they can't say what is and is not working in the house, right? So an estate, not an auction,
Investment property?
not an investment property. All right, what about a foreclosure? So a bank now owns the house. They're like, we never lived there. We're not going to fill out a seller's disclosure. What about new construction is exempt from it as well? So there's a couple of those types of things that are exempt from. But if you get an investment property and the investor was like, yeah, I never lived in that property, so then they draw a line or they check all the boxes that say do not know, I would push back on that as a listing agent. I would push back on that as a buyer's agent said. You are not exempt from this. You know something about this property. For instance, the last question is, are you within 1 mile of an airport? You know if you're within a mile of an airport or not, right? Or anything like that. So you're not getting off the hook on that. All right, keep it going. Now, the seller's disclosure, which is a state form, by the way, there are certain exemptions to that. Those same exemptions do not apply to the lead-based paint form. All right, so anybody that, any house that was built prior to 78 needs to have a lead-based paint form involved. All right, title approval. So title insurance will be a part of this sale. All right, so title insurance is one of those interesting things, right? So whenever we pay for insurance, you name it, car, health insurance, life insurance, property insurance, whatever. This is the one, any insurance you pay for is to protect against a future incident. Title insurance, you pay a premium, one-time premium for something that may have happened in the past. All right? So that's one of the differences in that type of insurance. And so it protects against clouds on the title, liens against the title, that sort of stuff. There's two elements to it. So the seller picks up the owner's policy. So this is checked on your things. Owner's policy is picked up by the seller, and lender's policy is picked up by the buyer. If it's cash, there may not be a lender side, but there will still be title insurance from the seller side. Okay, and then a lot of times the seller will pick up, choose which title company. They're all, similar. We usually have preferences on who we like, but you have a choice. Any questions on title insurance? All right, keep going. Taxes are prorated to the day of closing. So you are going to check box 2 on these agreements. Oh, here. All right. So, just a quick thing on taxes. Come on. All right, so the way taxes work in Indiana, we pay taxes in the arrears. This year we pay for last year's taxes, all right? So we pay taxes in the arrears. This year we pay for last year's taxes. So what happens is, all right, so you can describe to people, and people will shake their head like they know how to prorate taxes and the concepts of it. Most people don't, and that includes some real estate agents, I argue. I've gotten to the point where I draw pictures to explain it. So sometime in April, we get a tax bill. And with that tax bill comes 2 coupons. The first one is due May 10th, and the second is due November 10th. The May 10th bill covers the first 6 months of last year. Think of it that way. All right? So this one covers the first 6 months, and this one will cover the second 6 months. Now we're on the market, and we are going to go under contract, and we are going to close sometime in, let's say, September. All right? So we're on the market, and now the first installment's already been paid, but the second installment has not been paid. So when we close on that, because this is yet to come due, the seller says, hey, I owned the property during this period, so this year we're paying last year's taxes, so here's the money. You pay it, all right? So here's the money for that. But then I also lived in the property during this period of time up to the 6-month mark, so here is the money. When this bill comes due next year, here it is. You pay it. And the same goes true for this period of time that is a portion of this bill. Here it is. When it comes up, you pay it. So those are what we refer to as the tax prorations, and that is what number 2 is all about. Okay? Any questions on how that works? Great. It does get a little clunky in here when it comes time to talk about new construction, because assessed values, it might have been billed here, and you might be paying taxes here just on the raw land because it didn't get completed until maybe sometime in the middle to the later of the year, and the full assessment doesn't come up until here. So that can get tricky if you're selling something like that. The other thing is the homestead exemption is a big deal, right? So homestead exemption, having it on your primary resident, can reduce your taxes so that you are paying about 1% of the assessed value. If it's residential in nature, it'll be 2% of the assessed value. So that can be a big difference right there if you're not careful. Any questions on taxes? I'm not going to get deep into tax, but that is what the prorations are about.
Is this our job to calculate the amount and put it on the?
Not precisely. No, the title company will calculate it to the day before closing. And by the way, and we'll talk about net sheets here in a minute. I don't want to get too deep into that. But to answer your question, Garrett, the title company.
Okay.
All right. So, and that's what this is, you know, succeeding year on recently constructed homes. You just got to be careful on that. All right. Again, now we're getting into a lot of what I refer to as pre-printed stuff on the boilerplate sort of stuff on the contract. All right. So prorations, be it taxes, HOA fees, if there's a lease involved, so remaining days on the lease or damage deposits, all of that stuff can be prorated. Time is of the essence. All dates expire at 11/59. And by the way, as I'm going through this contract with somebody, I'm pointing to key terms that I know are in this contract. You should know what this contract says. You should. I'm paraphrasing a lot of it. You should read it, and you should be able to explain it to people without reading it to them word for word. And I do a visual by pointing to certain key times. All right. All right, homeowners. This says buyer and seller have the right to withdraw any offers or counteroffers prior to acceptance. So, therefore, if your buyer makes an offer and the seller makes a counteroffer, and the buyer is sitting there thinking about it, say, yeah, this looks good. I think we may do that as soon as we get back from whatever we're doing, and another offer comes in, the seller says, hey, have they accepted our counteroffer? No, I haven't seen it yet. Then withdraw it because we got another offer in. The rules have changed. So before everything is, remember, things have to be accepted and delivered. Delivery is key. homeowners association. So the the property is in a homeowners association, and the seller has 2 days, let's say in this case, to deliver any HOA docs. Okay? And then the buyer has 2 days to review those. If the buyer doesn't speak up and say anything about them, then they're deemed acceptable. Okay, it's always good to get those to a buyer before they write the offer. Therefore, if you are the listing agent, having HOA docs in the attached documents that I show you in the MLS would be good. If attorney's fees, you can hire an attorney if you want. You don't need to. We're not what they refer to as an attorney state. So the title company has an attorney on staff, usually, that can answer basic questions. They're not there to represent people. They're just there if we need to have questions about how people are taking title or some of that sort of stuff. Fair housing, we're offering this house out to anyone regardless of being in a protected class. Okay. By the way, due to fair housing risk, broker will not prepare, review, or submit personal information letters, those love letters, right, to the other party. And then more things. So again, prorations are done on taxes, insurance, and so forth today just prior to closing. Underground mining's happening in Indiana. Subsidence insurance is available. That has to do with sinkholes and that sort of stuff. Meth lab registry, if that's important to you as a buyer, you need to check that out. I have not checked into the meth lab registry to see if this house was on a previously used for meth. And the same with sex offender registry. I have not checked that out. If that's important to you, you need to go to the website and check that out. Conveyance will be through a general warranty deed, which is usually what you want. Sometimes there's a trust deed or something, but unless otherwise noted, that's the way it's going to come. Seller is or is not a foreign person. They're subject to the Foreign Person Residential Tax Act. That comes into a whole different thing. So if you suspect that a seller is not a U.S. citizen and owns property, be on alert for that because the title company needs to know about that. All right, so things can be sent digitally through mail and fax or the email, that sort of stuff. And digital signatures are binding. Let's see here. This applies to your executors, administrators, legal representatives. I've not put anything illegal in here that can invalidate the whole thing. All right. Let's see here. No oral agreements are binding. I'm on line 400 right there. It's got to be in writing, so no oral agreements. All right. I can recommend you on line 405 to service professionals, but you're free to choose whomever you want. That could be lenders, title companies, contractors, on down the line. I can recommend you to people, but you're free to choose whomever you want. By signing below, you're going to get a copy of this. All right. This information is going to be published in a multiple listing service or internet site. All right. Let's see here. You can be contacted by mail, email, text messages. If the buyer holds a real estate license, they'll put it there. Where it means broker, it means licensee. If there's anything else in here, this is where it goes. This is your further conditions. This is where you can input anything else that you feel needs to be addressed. I put in here, seller to replace roof prior to closing. You will see sometimes on an MLS sheet, hey, seller will replace roof with good offer. All right. If you don't write it in here that they're going to replace that roof as part of your offer, they might say, well, we were only going to do that if it was a good offer, and we didn't think your offer was good enough, so you didn't write it in, so we're not doing it. Even if it was on the MLS sheet or something like that. So if there's anything of question that needs more clarification, put it in further conditions. We're not here to draft legal language or anything like that, so keep it simple. But make it to the point. And if you're not sure, come see me or your manager or somebody else. All right, so consult your advisor, acknowledgement. This is not a limited agency transaction where I'm representing both the buyer and the seller. And then I'm going to give them, until say 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to respond to this. I give people at least 24 hours, maybe a little bit more, depending on when we're putting it together. I think you got to be reasonable. There are agents out there that will make it such a short time period. It's like, there's no way I'm going to get an answer for you. So don't be disappointed if I go past the expiration date. Okay? The other thing, when you are putting in a time, put in 10 a.m., put in 3 p.m. If you put in a time of 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you know when they are going to get back to you? 11:59 p.m. On that Friday when you're trying to go out and have fun with friends. Don't make things deadlines because people will go right up to the deadline. So make it at a time frame that's still within the day that you can address something, not 7 o'clock at night, or you expect to be working at 7 o'clock at night. All right, and then down here, this is where the buyer will sign in the box right above their name. All right, and then getting down here, this is where the seller will respond. So they are going to date it, or you will date it for them, and then they are either going to accept it exactly the way it's written, flat out reject it, or make a counteroffer. And if they make a counteroffer, they're saying, hey, there's 9 pages of contract right here. We accept everything in that except this line and that line and this line. And that's where the counteroffer comes into play, if there is one. All right? So here is an example of that. So, and by the way, I'm going to make a note here. When I'm writing up an offer, right? And so I've got the buyer, I don't have the seller. And I don't know the seller's name necessarily, right? Until I go digging into the public records, that due diligence we talked about. And so I think it's only polite and good form to put all the parties in here, all right, even if they're not my clients. Now, I don't have their email addresses, so if I put it in, I usually put mine into dotloop, even though I don't have their emails. That way it autofills on every document from there on out. I just think it looks professional for us, and it serves well for the people downline, be it the lender, the title company, the appraiser, whatever, I think it's laziness to not put the other agent's name in there. So then when it comes time to autofill, say a counteroffer, this is where you go. So I got the parties' names, and it says, hey, we're going to agree to everything except the seller reserves that dining room light fixture. The price is going to be to $245 now. Seller contribution to buyer broker compensation. We asked for 3, they came back at 2.5, so I'm going to have to turn to the buyer and say, okay, that puts you on the hook for the difference. And the closing is to be changed by a date. And so then down here, then this is where the seller, you have a choice on this counteroffer. It's party neutral. It doesn't say the buyer or seller until you check the boxes and apply the responsibility. And then if it's good to the buyer, they accept. If it's not, they can counter this counteroffer, or they could flat out reject it. And it's just worth noting here. Remember, so up here, up above, we made these changes. Then it says right down here, all other terms and conditions of the purchase agreement and all previous counteroffers, because you might get counteroffer 2, 3, 4, shall remain in effect except as modified above in this counteroffer. All right. So now if you went back to, they said, well, we don't want to accept this, but we'll give them $240. So then the next counteroffer, that is the only point you're going to address. You're not going to go back through everything. And by the way, I'll make mention of it. This is different than the inspection response. All right. So when we get to inspection responses, you do have to restate everything over and over again. All right. Moving forward.
In that case, you're amending to 240, you're just going to submit 2 or whatever at 240. If they sign on it and the only mention in your second counter offer is that price, these things still stay.
Those stick. That's exactly right. Good point. All right. Another thing I'm going to just mention here that I've skipped over, but I'll bring it up, is good, writing a good offer, and I see these things, right, is blank fields. So when you get in, there's all these blank fields, right? I was taught years ago if you are not putting anything in the blank field, dash it out, okay? Don't put NA there because somebody said you do not know if it's applicable or not applicable. But by dashing it out, I see a contract like that, and I know there's a good agent paying attention to things. It says, I have seen this blank, and we are choosing not to put anything in there, right? Other than just all these blanks in the contract, and I just fill this one and fill that one and fill that one, and there's all these blanks in there. I think that looks sloppy myself. All right, so we've been through purchase agreement, counteroffer. Okay, this is the buyer exclusive agency contract. This is what we now have in place. Before you do substantial work for any buyer, you should have this in place. And this could be a situation, so you guys sat through an agency session already, all right? So I shouldn't have to spend did you guys address this form?
Not like what you're looking at.
Okay.
She talked about it, yeah, not in depth.
Okay. In Indiana, you are going to play one of 3 roles with a client, with somebody. Your agency options are buyer's agent, seller's agent, or limited agent, all right, in the middle. In Indiana, there is not such a status as transaction coordinator or something like that. You are one of those 3 roles. In the case where you're going to show somebody around a house or multiple houses or something like that, before you do any substantial work with them, which would include showing a house, you're going to need this in place. To talk to them initially on the phone, you don't have to have one of these in place. To talk to them about, the market and even certain properties. But when they want to dial it up and see things, certainly get you to fetch more information on it and so forth, you're going to need more of it. All right. So what I do, for instance, is if somebody contacts me out of the blue and they want to go see a property, that's fine. I'll talk to them about the property, about their needs. I'll talk to them about all kinds of stuff about them and what it is they're after. After all, that's why they called, is for them needing something. When it comes to this form right here, then, I will finish up my conversation by explaining agency relationships. And if you'd like to work with me, I'd be happy to work with you now that I know a little bit more about your situation. If you just want to make it for this one property, you can do that. So right under here, scope of search, you might make this subject to one property only. So therefore, if I go show you this house, we have an arrangement, but you may not want to be tied to me ongoing for every other house out there. So I tend to start my relationships out with people by us talking on the phone, me getting to know you, and then maybe we'll agree to go look at one property because that's what's on your mind. And then if it goes well and but that's maybe not their house, I'd say, hey, if you want to continue to work together, I'm happy to do so. We will expand this out to include all properties over a period of time. All right? Now, if there's somebody, a repeat client, somebody I've known for a long time, and they're like, yeah, Coyne, you're the man, you're the only one we're going to work with, then I may start off with a broader one. All right? But if you're just getting to know each other, and then there is an amount of commission. And what this says is, if you purchase a property, it is agreed upon that you will pay me, in this case, 3.5% plus $295. I should have put the percent sign in there. Go ahead and write that in. It wouldn't fall below $2,000. But what may happen is, based on the way things used to be, and we may get the opportunity for you, the buyer, to request that the seller offset some of this. In fact, that's what it says. Broker with consent to buyer is to receive any compensation from the seller under, they got to reword some of this, and such compensation shall be credited against buyer's financial obligation to the buyer. So if the seller kicks in anything, that offsets what we've agreed to. All right? If the seller is actually, let's say it's new construction, a builder, or there's something where they're offering out a bonus. Hey, anybody that brings us an acceptable offer by the end of the month, we will pay, X amount. And if that X amount is in excess of what you've agreed to here, you cannot keep the X amount. Okay, so agree up front to what you are worth and what you are willing to work for, and try to stick with that. I think 3.5% is a good number. I think 3% can be a good number too. And you're just talking your side of the commission. If you start getting below that 3 to 2.5, 2 or lower, you are just undermining yourself and should have a conversation with your manager about your explaining your value and all the rest of that. Any questions? So this is the buyer agent commission. I usually try to go for 6 months with these things if it's a broader. So I'll try to go for 6 months, and then usually I put in this verbiage that is in the forms that you've got. Hey, this applies to anything in the MLS, new construction, or for sale by owner, FSBOs. And this is going to, although I have the ability to sell anywhere in the state of Indiana to Bloomington or Evansville, I am saying I will work with you in St. Joseph, Elkhart, LaPorte, or Marshall counties. If you change your mind and decide to go to Illinois or to Indianapolis, we're probably going to refer that one out.
I have a question. If you only make it for the one property, you meet it for the first time, and then they want to extend that out, then do you have to make a new contract, or do you amend this one?
You could go either way. I probably would just freshen this one up and say, I'm going to have you sign a new one. And by the way my presentation, I'm not here to talk agency, but we're throwing a lot at you. The way I do it is this. We have that conversation. What interests you? Tell me about your situation. What are you looking for? All the rest of that. I try not to bombard people. Well, have you been into a lender? Are you pre-approved? Otherwise, I'm not going to waste another minute with you. You're going to push people away if you come across too hard. You gotta attract more bees with honey than you do with vinegar at that point, right? Eventually, I know enough to know I will get there at some point. And I say, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but there's been some changes in the business, and it has to do with identifying our roles as agency. And if you want to go see this property, I'm happy to show it to you, but I'll be working for you as a buyer's agent, all right? And in that event, so we have to have a formalized agreement before we go showing the house. I'd like to send it off to you so you can review it in advance, but know that I'll have to send it to you for either a signature or before we walk through the house, on the hood of my car, we're going to get this signed. All right, that's fine. So I'm not asking you to sign it this minute. I'm going to send it to you, and I've got I'm going to send it to you in an email, all right? Let's see here, Quinn's. Let me try to give you, I always think it's good to show you let's see. Okay, this is a good example, right? She called me about this. Hey, I received confirmation that we're able to view the property at 2:15. I'll give you a call when I'm on my way. There's one aspect we did not have time to discuss on the phone, but it centers around the new agency rules. So this isn't the best example. Let me give you a different one, because I usually have talked to them about this. Boy, oh boy. Well, there's a reason I'm going to this effort to do this.
I don't remember the promise
God, what was the name of that guy? Yeah. Well, in any event, I start off by telling them that, agreeing that we're going to go see the property, all the rest of that. But then I also send them the agreement for them to review and an explanation of buyer agency, including a news report that we have on our website that explains buyer agency and so forth. And that way, then they've heard it from me on the phone. They've now seen it in an email. And when it comes time to signing it, they will be a little more familiar with it. All right? All right.
Can you email us that?
You know what? Let me. Oh, what's the name of that guy? Let's see here. Lenders' names. Yeah, not that one. Buyer agency. Give me just a second. That's all right. It's I don't want to consume too much time here looking for it, but that's the point. Is buyer agency agreements go down better when they are prepped with it. Oh, you hit them with it several times and they understand. Any questions on getting those put together? All right.
You're able to pre-populate a lot of that stuff for you
Yes, so if you get your templates set up in advance, yes. All right, next, this is the seller's disclosure form. You're going to see this on both sides of the equation, both when you're working with buyers and we're working with sellers, all right? So if we're on the buyer side, you always just make sure you got the date and the address correct in there. The sellers need to fill this in. An agent should never fill this in for a seller, okay? You'll hear that multiple times. And everything needs some kind of check mark on it. So it's either none or not included, or it's rented. It's defective, not defective, or do not know. So a lot of houses don't have a built-in vacuum system. So that'd be a check mark in the none or not included. But then the dryer, defective or not defective. If they check the box not defective, don't always assume that that means it's included, all right? That's going to come on the purchase agreement, but they should check a field in there. All right, so so everything needs some kind of check, and what I tell them is there's 2 pages here. If there's something that there is an issue that you want to disclose, for instance, switches and outlets, right? So maybe everything pretty much works except this one switch or outlet over here. So what you might do is say, hey, not defective, but put a 1 in parentheses here or there as a footnote. And then on page 2, put your footnote here under additional comments, and you might say, hey, this one particular outlet switch doesn't work. Or you will see here, are there moisture and or water problems in the basement crawl space or area? And they say, hey, no, it's fine, but occasionally on a real rainy day, we will have water come into that corner of the basement. Then you need to put that in there, right? Back to agency for a moment. You are working for a buyer and you're a buyer's agent, or you're working for a seller and you're a listing agent, right? If I am sitting in the house and I see water coming through the roof and they're filling out this disclosure and they say, everything's fine with the roof, no problem here, right? That is a material fact about the property that I am obligated to disclose, all right? I keep confidential things confidential, but if I know that there is an issue with a property, a material fact, I need to let somebody know that.
You wouldn't have them refill out their self-disclosure?
I would say, come on, man, I see water come in through this roof, and you're saying no. I highly recommend, and I might not even work with them if I know they're intentionally lying on it, all right?
You won't work with them?
If I know they're intentionally lying about something, there's very few times I won't work with somebody because I'm usually pretty adaptable to people. But one is if they show serious signs of being prejudiced, you know what, I can't. If you are going to go down that road and you are that hardcore on this, I'm out, because this is going to lead to trouble for both of us. And the other is if I know they are lying about something going on, like intentionally covering something up, it's like, you need to do something with that or I'm out of here. So, all right, so then they sign this at both places. Now, when it comes to the seller's disclosure, for instance, most of these things are written in the present tense. So, are there structural problems? Are there moisture and or water problems? But occasionally, like hazardous conditions, have there been or are there hazardous conditions? All right? So, if they had the house treated for mold or they had the house treated for radon, they probably need to say, yeah, there have been in the past. We've treated it, and you can explain, but that's the case. Now, when it comes to moisture problems in the basement and crawl space, there's 2 types of basements in the state of Indiana, right? Those that leak and those that don't leak yet, right? That's a basement for you, all right? So, if somebody is saying, well, it's not raining today, so it's not leaking today, right? So that's carrying it a little bit too far. If you got issues, and by the way, the buyer will see this prior to making an offer, hopefully, and will acknowledge it. Buyers are way more accepting of things if they know it up front. If it doesn't come out until the inspection, then it becomes an issue, right? Because on the front end, they're excited about the house and they're ready to put something together. They want to make this work and they're willing to work around things. Now, if you see something on here that is alarming, you could always address it in the purchase agreement. Okay, say seller is to correct this one thing, if it's a correctable condition. I don't know. By the way, this is dated and so forth, right? Here's the date up here, as well as the seller should, it doesn't say date right here, but they probably should date it when they sign it.
Is there a relation between when this can be dated as filled out as to when it goes on the listing?
No, I think it should be somewhere in that same time frame, though, you know, within a day or two at least. But what, yeah, but I would say if a house was actively on the market, it went under contract, and it was under contract, and then for some reason that fell through and it went back on the market, I'm gonna, as a buyer's agent, I'm gonna ask the listing agent what happened. And they may or may not, because of confidentiality, tell you what happened or didn't happen, right? But what I might say is, hey, you have now learned, even if you're not telling me, I know you have learned something about this house most likely through the process of inspections, and the buyer may be requesting things, and that may be why it fell through. I have a right, I think, to ask for the seller to update this. Now that you have been through one transaction that fell through, I would kindly request that you update this in any way you feel it's updated, including the date. And that way, if I get the same inspector by chance that goes through and they're like, yeah, I told them this thing's fallen down because of the pest, and they didn't do anything to alert us to that, there's a problem there. All right? Okay. When it comes to you being a listing agent and your client is far away and they're filling things out, they can, through dotloop, through the magic powers of dotloop, you can send them to this document with certain permissions to where they can go through and they can check all of these boxes through dotloop. All right? But you as the agent should not do that for them. Seller's disclosure, and then I talked about this, so purchaser's inspection authorization. So once you do have a deal put together, and remember, a deal signed today means inspection time frame start tomorrow. So time is of the essence, so get these things put together and signed. And if through the process of learning things about the property, more things come up, you usually get this signed initially at the front end of the transaction. If they want to order more inspections, you don't necessarily need to get this form revised, but I would have a paper trail and an email or a text messages that say, hey, you did want further inspections done, and there's going to be a cost that comes with that. Okay? And the reason for that is let's say it falls through, and the buyer now is responsible for paying any inspections that have been done, even if they've been paid for, and it falls through, and they're like, yeah, we're out of here. And you say, well, you still owe for inspections. And they're like, yeah, no, I'd never ordered that, or I didn't tell you to move forward with that. I'm not responsible for that. It gets it to be a very sticky situation. Pending progress sheet. This is the one that gets turned into the office. Okay, so when you have a sale that you are turning in, you're going to fill this in. And this is what our staff goes off of. So the address, MLS, was it a C&E sale or a listed or both? When do you expect to close? What was the final sale price? Be careful with some of these. dotloop will autofill certain things, and that's a handy technique and tool. But sometimes it doesn't. If they came in, if you put in 230 into the system to write the offer, and they came back with 245, but that didn't originate in the system, This is going to pick up on what was last put into a field, not what was scanned in from somebody else. All right? All the rest of this information, when it comes time to, I don't have this filled in completely, definitely give us their phone numbers and email. If something happens to you and we have to pick up the ball on this, as the broker who is ultimately responsible for seeing people through, we need their information. Okay? As far as emails go, if there's both Sam and Sue, there will be spot for 2 emails. Put the one person in here that is most responsive, that you usually have more of a relationship with one over the other, or they're the point and contact person. Because that email, by the way, or the one that likes you the best, I should say that too, because this is the one the survey is going to be sent to at the end of it all. So make sure you've got that one in there. All right, so title company, if there's a mortgage company, earnest money, who's holding it. This broker administrative fee ought to be checked yes. This $295 comes along with every transaction in addition to the commission. All right, your name if there's a referral to be paid. All right, so if you're on the Zillow team or you're getting referrals from somebody and they get paid out of this transaction, make sure you put it down there. Any questions on this form? Okay, this is just a reminder list for you. Say, hey, I'm going through this transaction. What should I be doing? By the way, you should be getting there is a class that's coming up. It's called Contracts to Close. It is that whole pending escrow period. What is everything that's going on in that period? We have a whole class on that. And so, but this is one of those helpful documents that says, okay, how many days did we have for these things? And has it been done? What is the final date? So get that down. All right? All right. So these are lesser known documents I've included for you so that you are aware of them, but they are not ones that we use all the time. So backup offer is one of them. Something's under contract, they're in agreement with somebody else. Yeah, I have a client that is really hot for this property and says, if something happens to offer number 1, I want to be ready to go. I want to be there. I don't want you putting it back out on the market for anybody to get to, right? And this can work out for you. Not all the time, but it can work out for you. So we put together an agreement, hammered out all the details, and get it accepted subject to the attached backup addendum. All right, and this...
You fill out both, fill out the purchase agreement and this.
And you write under further conditions, subject to the attached backup addendum or something, backup offer addendum, because that spells out the terms that says this is a backup. It will only go into first place if something happens to the original, the first offer. And by the way, while the buyer is sitting there wondering if the first offer is going to fall through, they can still be looking at other offers. And they can pull this at any time and say, hey, I found another house, take my backup off the table.
You put in the further discussions,
Further conditions
further conditions.
on the purchase agreement, subject to the attached backup offer addendum. All right, so everybody works through that. So sometimes you have to change the original purchase agreement. All right, one way to do it is to amend something. So an amendment is there's something in the purchase agreement we are changing. So it could be, in this case, time for closing the transaction. We are amending that to say now it's on the 6th instead of the 4th. Time for making application or other things. Sometimes there's something you have to just free flow in, all right? So that is when you are changing something already there. Alternatively, there are addendums to purchase agreement that add something. So amending is changing what's there. An addendum is adding something different to it, to the equation. Okay? This is one where we said seller to contribute $2,500 towards buyer's closing costs and prepaids. All right, so that would be an example of what you might have an addendum for. And everybody signs it. By the way, you are changing the terms. Not everybody has to agree. If somebody says, no, I'm not doing that, then you do not have a change. Everybody has to be on the same page and sign it. Buyer's inspection response. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've got a class on it. But let's say we got that 20 days to get the inspections done, reviewed, and a response to those inspections. And so this comes back. So let's say the buyer says, hey, I'll move forward provided the seller double tap breaker. Seller corrects the following conditions. Double tap breakers to be corrected by a licensed electrician and radon mitigation system be installed. All right. And then this is where they would sign. And if the seller is okay with that, they say, yes, I accept. Or if they're saying, no, I'm not agreeing to all that, see my response. And then you'll have a seller's response. If there's a laundry list of things, sometimes you get a house that has a lot of problems. And, you got to give the seller a chance to remedy. So this is a larger format than, say, this. This, God help you if you have to put more repairs in than will be allowed to fit in here. But sometimes you do. And then say, hey, I've got an additional addendum that's a laundry list, and that is included here. All right? Is or is not included. And then I would say a complete copy of the inspection. So go ahead and check that box too. All right? All right. I'm going to point out one thing here. So this is a buyer's inspection response, okay? BIR, you'll oftentimes see it abbreviated like that, BIR. And say the 20 days was not enough, or they pushed back us on the 20 days and said, you got to get it done in 12. And hey, we didn't get it all done. So buyer is exercising that additional order time to order, receive, and get inspection. So there's a little bit, remember I said there's the original time period of 20, or they push back at 10, and then I said there's an additional 5 some people put in there. This is exercising that right. Don't worry, I'm throwing a lot at you, but all right. And so this would be the larger addendum that I'm laundry listing all kinds of stuff in. All right, as is addendum. So if you remember, when we were in the purchase agreement, there was 3 choices. 1 was to waive inspections. 2 was to get inspections done. And 3 was to buy it as is. All right? So let me just go right back. I want to point that out because this is really important. Okay, this is in the purchase agreement. I'm back to the purchase agreement, right? Inspections. Waiving inspections, getting the property inspected, or property sold as is. See the attached addendum. I had you highlight that, remember? So now that's where we're at, is that addendum. And what this says is, and you got to be familiar with this. You will see any number of properties out there that in the marketing remarks or people promoting it say, yeah, this is being sold as is. You see enough MLS sheets, you will begin to see that people are selling as is. Or you got a seller that says, hey, this was my mom's house. We're not living here. We're not in town. We don't want to mess around with fixing it. So we're selling it as is. That's fine. You can sell it as is. You can just agree not to agree to do certain repairs. But what this does is it opens up the door to different possibilities. So the buyer is saying when they fill this in, I am buying this property. We all agree right now I'm buying it as is. However, I am still going to get inspections done because I want to know what I'm up against, right, when I'm buying this property. So I'm still getting inspections, but you have said I'm buying it as is. So now I get the inspections done, and I don't like what I see. So you remember back in the purchase agreement where the buyer had to give the seller the opportunity to remedy things that were wrong with the house? Now they don't, because they were told up front, we're selling this as is. And the buyer says, okay, I don't like what I see, I am out. I pay for my inspections, but I'm done, and I get my earnest money back. And the seller says, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And the buyer says, well, you told me you were selling it as is. I still went forward with getting inspections, but you told me up front you weren't going to do anything. Well, and they say, well, what was wrong? Well, there was some missing smoke detectors, and there was a cracked pane of glass. I don't like it anymore. I'm out. And they can walk and get their earnest money, whereas the other one gave the seller the opportunity to remedy. And the seller sits there and says, well, I would have done that. So therefore, it might look up front appealing to a seller to sell the property in as is, along with this addendum. It gives the buyer an out to walk away without giving the seller the chance to fix something. So that's fine if the seller wants to sell the property in as-is shape, but make the buyer come to you and ask for something, and then you decide. All right. Told you I'm going to move through these fast now. Request for extension of time. So remember, we asked for 20 days. They pushed back with 12. And now we're at the point where I need more time. So here is a form that says, hey, the request for extension is submitted by the buyer, and we need more time. They agreed to make inspection response extended to, and then I just put a date in there. Buyer and seller agree to that. Buyer inspection response, acceptance of property condition. So one critical thing you got to know about these inspections and responses and all the rest of that is there's time frames involved in there, and you've got to act on things. If you don't act within that window of time, it is deemed acceptable. All right, so if we have that 20 days and we go to day 21 and we think we're going to submit an inspection response on day 21, you might get a hard person on the other end of that line, the other agent saying, listen, you already blew past your window. Don't submit one because we're not doing anything, and according to the verbiage of the contract, since you did not submit a response, it is deemed acceptable to you. All right, everybody understands that. So what you will find sometimes is a buyer gets inspections and says, I'm good with all this. The house is clean. I can deal with the little things that are coming up, and I'm not going to ask for anything. And if I'm on the listing side, either side, I get this form involved, all right? Sometimes a buyer's agent will say, hey, buyer chose not to ask for anything, therefore we're good. And they are leaning on the fact that because we're not answering within that time period, it's deemed acceptable. I guess by default that is kind of true. I think it's a sloppy way of doing things. So if I'm on the listing side, I'm going to say, hey, take a look at this form. I want your buyer to say, hey, having exercised the right to have the inspections, I do hereby accept the property in its as-is condition. All right, so I'm not going to ask for anything. Or having reserved the right to have inspections, I later on chose to change my mind and waive those off. All right, make them state it and sign it that says, hey, I'm no longer asking for these things to be done. Inspection waiver. Remember, there is that option on the purchase agreement to waive inspections. And I said, I would have them initial over to the side. I'm also going to have them sign this one right here. It says, hey, I've given you the chance to get the property inspected. You are making a choice to not. I am off the hook if there's a problem that arises, and it gives them one more layer to think about that decision. Okay. Escalation clause. Escalation clause is a company offers that says, we are aware that we may be competing with another buyer for this property. And if that is the case, we're coming in at X amount. if that other buyer comes in above what we are offering, we're willing to go above them by a certain amount up to some kind of cap. So what it says is, if we are in a competing offer situation, we are willing to go up by an escalating factor of $2,000. You can write in whatever you want. And we will go up, so we're coming in at $235, but we'll pay $2,000 more than a competing offer up to a max of $250. Once we hit $250, if they're higher than us, we're out. Okay? So it's escalation clause.
Can you turn that one in with the purchase agreement?
Yeah, and I would note that in the further conditions. See attached escalation clause. Now, we are not so much in the multiple offer situation, and I say that Steve's had a couple instances of multiple offer situations. But what will happen is if there's multiple offers coming in and multiple escalation clauses that come in, right? So everybody wonders, well, where is the stopping point? Because this guy said he'd pay a little bit more than that guy, and is that where we stop? And the answer is no. What happens is you run up each escalation clause, because each one says, I'll pay a little more than the other guy. Oh, I'll pay a little more than that. Oh, I'll pay a little bit more than that. I'll pay a little more than that. And you keep doing that until you hit everybody's max, and then whoever is still in the game pays a little bit more than that, and that is where you're going to end up. It's tricky. Be careful with them. And sellers, can do well. You make those prices go up. Is it still going to appraise out? There's all these things that come with it.
Yesterday I showed a house, and in the agent remarks, they were just taking the highest and best offer by 3 p.m. today. So if I would have, which I didn't, but if I would have made an offer for that, then would I have been able to write up one of these, or is it just one highest and best offer?
Yep, you can. So you can definitely go in with an escalation clause that says, I am coming in at $230, but see my attached escalation clause that says if somebody's higher than $230, I'm willing to pay X amount above their offer up to a certain amount. So you can accomplish that. Now, so everybody heard what she just said. It's restated. They said offers are due by
Today at 3 p.m. Highest and best offer due today by 3 p.m.
Okay, so they may or may not get to those at 3:01. So they've collected everything by 3 o'clock. The assumption is, okay, then by 3:01, they're starting to talk about it. They may or may not have gotten there. But under Indiana law, if you recall, agents are under duty to present all offers all the way up until the time of closing, right? So if my guy can't sign it until 3:30, I'm still doing it. And that agent has to present that offer. So agents like to establish these deadlines for things, and God love them. That's good because it kind of gets everybody moving and gives them something to aim for. But if I miss that 3 o'clock deadline and my buyer still wants to make an offer, I'm going in at 3:15, I'm going in at 3:30, I'm going in at 4, I'm going in the next day if I want to. Okay? Now they may have already accepted something. They may not go anywhere. But if you present an offer, they are bound to present it to their client. Okay? All right. So that's an escalation clause. I've already checked the box. I think is most likely to work. And by the way, so a couple other things. If a property, an offer gets escalated up and it goes from here to there to here to there to here to there, you have to finalize where do we actually land, all right, and do so by way of a counteroffer. Okay, so now it went from here to there to there to there, and now we landed somewhere. So in order to establish where we finalize this thing, the seller has to go back to the buyer and say, okay, you told us in an escalation clause you go up to here. Now here's the counteroffer showing that we went up to there. And it says somewhere in here, probably on, okay, documentation, right? They say if you are going to punch this up, the seller ought to come back with the buyer with documentation that says, okay, I just want to show you the other offer that drove this up to the highest point that we hit. I will say I don't always see that. In fact, why this document can be dangerous is you are showing the buyer's hand before ever getting there. You're saying, yeah, you're telling us you'll pay $230 now, but that you would pay $250. So you get that in front of some sellers, and they're like, I don't care if there's a competing offer or not. They said they'll pay $250. I want $250. So it's a little, I don't know.
But as a selling agent, you have the right to ask for theirs, so they're not lying.
Well, even if they are lying, I've had that happen where the seller says, no, there's not a competing offer, but you told me you'd pay $250. That is now what I want. Or do you still want the house? And if the buyer says, yeah, I still want the house, I showed my hand and you called me out on it, and so now here we go. So there's that. But what I do as a listing agent is if we're in competing offers and there's an escalation clause and one bumps the next to the next, before we go turning everybody else away and I write up the counteroffer, I will place a call to the agent that's involved with that buyer and say, listen, we have multiple offers. Your person said they'd go up to here. Do they still feel that way? Because somehow, after buyers sleep on things a little bit, they're like, oh, yeah, what did we commit to? What are we doing? Yeah, and here you've turned everybody else away. So then I have that agent call their client and get back to me while I'm still sitting with my client, or I can still make a move. And they're like, yeah, they said they would go there. Or no, they're wavering on it. It's like, okay, well, then I'm glad I found that out because I'm putting something in writing to someone.
I think I was a part of one of these before, and we didn't. They went above our cap, and I was like relieved. I was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
dodgeball. You know, like I can see how people might like turn away.
Sudden panic.
Well, I don't want to call it buyer's remorse, but I think in terms of a hangover. It's like, everybody gets frantic, right? We're in the house, we got 15 minutes for our showing, and there's more buyers waiting at the door, and I'm told offers are due by a certain time. We got to make a decision. We just go for it. We've already lost out on how many, and then they go above list price by how much. Did you say your last offer was how much above list price?
$10,000.
Oh,
10,000 above list price, and then what happened?
And then the people that, well, I'll be honest with you, it was 10,000 above list price, was 117.5, I made it for 127.5. We waived the inspection, and I was counseled by Clint on that, and we submitted our offer. I thought we made a great offer, but the bid we lost out on, I was told that the people paid significantly more than what we did. They waived inspections, and they also paid for the seller's closing costs.
Yeah. But the point is, so they went 10 above and still didn't get it, right? There are people, though, that make these wildly higher offers and then wake up the next morning and say, what did we do? They were only asking here, and we went above there, therefore the hangover, right? So people do rethink things. To Garrett, exactly what you said. It's like, yeah, we did it, but I'm glad they didn't take it,
If you sign that and they accept it, you're locked in.
Well, there's got to be that counteroffer.
Okay.
So they have to then agree back to the counteroffer. They may have slept on it by that point, or the urgency might be gone. I don't know, but that's why I always pick up the phone and call and say, are they still in the game if we come back like they agreed to? All right. Appraisal gap coverage. All right. So some of these are just techniques for writing good offers, but let's say purchase price is here, okay? But the appraisal comes in here. even though the appraiser is fully aware that everybody agreed to this, right? But they still only appraised it for this much. And this is called the gap. It could be 5,000, it could be 100,000. We've seen it all. So if you have a buyer that has more money and they say, hey, we're going to go up in price and it may not appraise, but we're willing to cover so much of that gap. In this case, the example is $20,000. That means they've got an extra 20 in the bank that they can throw at this, because at the end of the day, once the appraisal comes in, the lender originally was going to loan on this amount. Now they are only going to loan on this amount. And if you are a minimal down payment buyer, FHA or something, you may not have the ability to cover the gap. If you've got more money in the bank, you might be able to cover the gap.
Is this included after the purchase agreement is signed, or can it be included with the purchase?
This would be part of the purchase agreement. So this is one of the things that a seller and their agent are going to look at and says, well, they're 20% down buyer, but they've just bumped this sale price up to a place that it may or may not get appraised at. But because they have 20% or more down, they probably have a spread that they can cover that spread. So be careful with these techniques. So escalation clauses, appraisal gap, waiving inspections, as is. Some of these things can come together to form an offer, and some agents certainly have used these techniques to make their offer sound more appealing than the other guy's offer. But be careful. Some of this stuff comes at a cost. If you're not used to doing it, get counsel from a trainer or a manager. Sight unseen acknowledgement. All right, in today's world, make an appointment, go show a house. Client, things are moving fast. Client is out of town and can't get in time to see this house, and it'll probably be sold by the time they could get in to see the house. Therefore, the agent is taking their phone and they are going to show this property virtually, right? I used to do it by way of Zoom. We used to set up Zoom calls, or you can do FaceTime. Now that you're on Apple, right? You can do FaceTime, or anyways, but I would always lose people in the basement. Never failed. I would lose connection downstairs, that sort of thing. So I've gotten to the point where now I just will shoot video. And I'll keep them to about 2 to 2.5 minutes. And I will cover a lot, and I'll do multiples then, right? And then I'll get back to my office and I'll upload them into a Google Drive folder. And then I'll share that with the buyer. And that's actually better because they can rewind, they can go back, whereas a FaceTime, if they're not recording, or Zoom, I should say, if they're not recording, they can't go back. And so that's what I will do. But they've never stepped foot in the house. And just like that engineer I was telling you about coming from California, never set foot in the house until long after it closed. So if you've got somebody like that, between the listing on the MLS and Zillow and Realtor.com and everywhere else, Google Street View, Google Earth View, maybe photos from the last listing if they can find them, and then me going through and videoing and saying, hey, I see the great kitchen here and I see a blemish over here. I'm showing as much as I can to you that you can pick up on. And with all of that, you want to move forward with purchasing this house, but you've never stepped foot, then I'm going to have you sign this document that says, hey, I've never been in there. Certain things you can only know by being in the house, and I am absolving my agent and the broker and everybody involved of if I'm not happy with it. Okay. FSBO builder form. So this is where an unrepresented seller, and you're bringing a buyer to the table. So you will hear people reference this. Now, this form is going to get changed, and the reason being line 17. This no longer comes into play unless it's negotiated in the purchase agreement somehow. Okay, but that just, so this is an unrepresented seller not working with an agent, and you're coming in representing a buyer. And just be aware, line 43 says the broker's agency relationship is with the buyer, but they've all agreed to work with you. All right? So you'll hear people reference the FSBO builder form. Okay, an amendment to the buyer-tenant exclusive agency contract. So remember, we have that agreement with the buyer to show them houses and put together deals. Sometimes you have to amend that. Sometimes it might be extending it. So rather than December 1st, I'm going to extend that to December 31st. And sometimes you do make an adjustment to the commission. Hopefully not. But if you need to, that is a possibility too. And remember, the contract is between the clients, in this case the buyers, and the managing broker has to sign these two.
You can sign the buyer's PRA as well.
Yeah, because that is an agreement between the buyer and the broker.
So we can get them to sign and then get it to you?
Yep, so you can either send it direct to me or Jen Lilly, or send it to our staff and they'll forward it over to me. Okay, no buyer agency relationship acknowledgement. So this is the exact opposite of a FSBO, where somebody's trying to sell their house by owner. This is where a buyer wants to purchase without them having the benefit of any representation on their part. They're under the impression they're going to save money by not having a real estate agent on their side because they can do it on their own, which is tricky because most people aren't that well versed with all the intricacies of buying a property. But here's an example of that. Again, these are lesser known forms. Final walkthrough form. You've been through everything and you're now doing a final walkthrough. By the way, always do a final walkthrough, and if you don't, get it in writing that they don't want to do a final walkthrough. You want to see how clean the house is, make sure you're not really there to inspect the house, but make sure that they're leaving it in decent shape. They haven't punched any holes in the walls, and it's basically everything that the buyer was expecting.
Remember Pam's experience during the agency class with her final walkthrough with the locks on the bedroom doors and the something down in the backyard? That was all because she did her final walkthrough and discovered it.
Yeah. Okay. And either the buyer did the walkthrough or they chose not to do a walkthrough. But I would highly recommend doing walkthroughs. All right. Request your commission. You're up against the closing now, and you are turning things into the staff to say, hey, guess what? I got a closing, and I want you to know. This form has two sides. If it's your listing, that's the top. But I've been kind of focusing on your sale as the buyer, so I filled in the bottom portion of this, right? I didn't do the calculation on what the commission is, but know that that goes in. If you don't fill it in, the staff will. If there is a referral to be paid, anything like that. Okay. Post-closing possession agreement. So this is that agreement, remember, that says we're going to stay in the house for, I don't know, 7 days after closing or something like that. So that, have this form along with it. It spells out in greater detail who's responsible for what. Had an instance where closed on the property, seller stayed in the property for 2 weeks, and during that time the dishwasher went out. Well, who's responsible for that? It's no longer their house. Even though the buyer's never lived in the house and never used that dishwasher, who's responsible for that? All right. And this is, by the way, post-closing possession. What's that?
After closing is happened.
And this is after closing and it's happened, and the seller is just going to hold over for a little bit. Do not, to the best of your ability, ever agree to pre-closing possession by a buyer. That's where a buyer moves in prior to them closing. Now, you will hear lots of reasons why they want pre-closing possession. You'll get some very authentic, in most cases, very sad stories like, yeah, we had to get out of our house, but now we got all the stuff in the truck and we got to put it somewhere. Can we get access to the house, right? What will happen, almost guarantee, if you ever work with a relocation company, they will absolutely never allow pre-closing possession. And most sellers should not, because the buyer will move in and then the urgency to get this thing closed is all gone. And by the way, now they're living in the house and they're starting to realize that not everything came up on the inspection and there's a problem. Or they couldn't close because there was something going on with the lender. And once you know, one delay turns into another delay, turns into another delay and another delay. And before you know it, the seller says, you are in my house. You said you're going to close and you're not closing. And so that just creates problems. Don't let it happen. If somebody has to do it, and I don't even recommend this whatsoever, but if they have to unload the truck somehow, maybe they can get possession to the garage only. They are not to move in. They are not to start work on the house. Somebody will move in pre-closing possession and start to tear the wallpaper off or tear out the flooring or tear something out. That will lead to a nightmare. So try never to get pre-closing possession. All right. Mutual release from purchase agreement. Hopefully you don't see many of these come your way, but occasionally it does. Where a deal falls through, it's at 10%. And in the event it does, if it's due to one of the conditions of the contract, then in most cases you just fill it out, put down the amount of earnest money, and it's getting returned to the buyers. In rare instance, there's going to be a fight over it, and then neither party wants to sign this, and that's where the 60-day letter comes into play. All right? And then these are just those addendums. Remember, contingent to sell and not contingent, contingent to the closing. And then this is the limited purchase contingency, right? So this is the that sudden death. And the next one is the first right, where it spells out the 48 hours or however long the buyer has to decide if they're going to move forward with the purchase or they're going to step aside. All right? That's packet one. I'm going to move on to packet two. Now the listing contract. Again, you have the table of contents there. On the left-hand side are things that are most likely to be in there. On the right-hand side are other things that you're going to come across. So, listing agreement. So this is an agreement between Cressy and Everett and the seller. Okay, so you put in all that information that we talked about. I usually try for a 6-month listing. I realize that it most likely will sell before 6 months time is up. But at times when houses have not moved so fast, it's nice to have that amount of time to get to market it. The price they're offering on the house, or they're asking for it. And then, is the seller delinquent on any loans, which could be a problem with the lien? So I've got checked. They are not in most cases. And then that the amount they're asking for the property is above what their costs of the sale are, what they owe on the property, and any other kind of closing costs. And that might seem like a natural, but if you were around during the Great Recession, right, there was any number of people that were upside down on the house, right? And you need to figure that out up front, because if they had to bring money to the table, you need to have that hard conversation with them when you're sitting down with them. Says, hey, based on the numbers I think and what you say you owe on this, plus, you know, my commission and title work and everything else, you're going to be upside down by X amount. Can you bring that to the table? And if they say yes, great. If they say no, then that's a problem, because what you don't want is to not realize that somebody's upside down and can't afford to come to the table with their own money. And here you've gotten a buyer involved, an appraisal, an inspection costs, and the buyer is now out this money when the seller knew they couldn't close on it anyway. All right, so it's a little unusual to have that in today's world, but it does happen. And then did the property come by way of the seller through a tax sale, sheriff's sale, a foreclosure, anything like that? That's usually a no. Is the seller a foreign person subject to foreign person tax, right? So in most cases not. The one deciding fact, do they have a social security number? And I know it seems odd to go ask you and you and you, do you have a social security number, or are you considered a foreign person subject to foreign person tax? You know, hard to say. So if you pick up on anything in the conversation that might lead to, hey, there's a question here, be aware of that. All right? All right, terms of sale. Of course, the seller will accept cash for the property. And then, you know, any buyer that's going to come in may have a loan, so conventional or insured conventional. But then this is where it's going to depend on your observations of the property, knowing what you know about VA and FHA loans. Can this go out for VA or FHA, or do you think it's risky? Because again, you would hate to offer it out as FHA and get a buyer who's already short on cash, by the way, because they're going FHA, to get involved, get the appraisal done, get the inspections done, be out that money, only to find out the appraiser says, yeah, this house is a mess. There's no way we're selling this FHA. And here they're out all that money. So it's incumbent on the listing agent and the buyer's agent to kind of sum up this house and say, will this go or won't this go?
Does it mean that it's like turnkey?
No, not turnkey. But if you see a rotten roof, chipping and peeling paint, just
Is there somewhere where we can find like a checklist of what we need to be looking for when we walk around?
I don't know. We occasionally will have an appraiser into our sales meetings, and if they're FHA or VA approved, but I don't know that there's a hard checklist. It has to do with condition, and they have in back somewhere in their manual, they know what these things are, but I've never seen the actual checklist.
We do have Michael Gross is coming, maybe he would have some more insight.
Yeah, that'd be a great question for the lender that we have. Yep. This offer for sale is the exact same verbiage that's on that purchase agreement. Remember the towel bars and racks and the garage door openers and that sort of stuff, right? Ceiling lights and fixtures. So that is the exact same. And you're also going to add in here anything else that doesn't fit in that category or you want to restate it, right? And then anything they're going to exclude. So the seller is now telling you on the listing agreement, we're excluding the cameras and security system and all that stuff. Seller shall remove all debris and personal property not included. So occasionally what you'll see sometimes is, remember I've been mentioning this pool table off and on, right? Some old pool table seller is like, yeah, we ain't taking that. That's going to the next owner. Well, the next owner might say, I don't want that. You know, you've got to get rid of that. So it's going to be on the seller's shoulders to get rid of that thing. And it's better that you find these things out early on, all right? Be aware, some bars, I can think of one bar in particular in this finished basement, that it's actually a movable bar. It's more of a piece of furniture, but it's so nicely done you would think it's built in, right? And they're like, no, that's going with us. So you don't want to fool the buyer into thinking that's staying. Get it out there in the open, whether things stay or whether they go. All right. Exclusive listing. You're not in agreement with any other broker at this time. All right. So we're agreeing to work together. And under these circumstances, you know, we will be due a commission, right? And so if it's exchanged, leased, sold, whatever, so long as it changes hands in one way or another, we're going to be due it. Now, this right here is what we refer to as the protection period. So if somebody is introduced to the property during that listing period, okay, follow me, and then it expires, and that person comes back to the seller and says, hey, I no longer see the sign in the yard. You're no longer in a listing agreement with your broker. I saw it last week. I'd like to make you an offer direct. All right. And so if that happens within 120 days of the expiration, we would still be due the commission. Again, if they were introduced during the listing period, it expires and they go to the seller directly, we would still be due the commission within that period of time. You guys have lots of questions, you just don't know it yet. All right, there's no commission, or there's no interest rate on unpaid commission. We get the commission gets paid at closing. Now again, the listing broker compensation. Remember, we're not back to the 6 or 7%, which is the whole. We're only talking the half, and this is the broker, the listing agent whose sign is in the yard. So in this case, it's 3.5%. These numbers can fluctuate a little bit. Sometimes it's 3%. I see some at 2.5%. I will tell you, if you know how to explain your worth, the value, it's not just you as a person, it's the company as a brokerage and everything we are going to do. We are geared. If any company out there, we are geared to handle listings. And I think buyers the same way. They give higher level of service and tools, everything to give to people. So we are not the discount guys. All right. So if people and brokers that discount their commission do so usually because they got nothing else to give. And that's the only thing they can offer to a client is a lower rate. Whereas we have, and get to know, I'm telling you this so you get to know your value in terms of you, your worth as a person and as the individual going to be assisting them, as well as the brokerage that is behind you providing all the services. Get to know that and get to a comfort level where you can explain that and you will earn more money. All right?
Is there like a resource that shows all those value propositions for?
Did we have any training sessions on tools and systems? I know Avery went through.
With your DeltaNet and Andrea did .loop. I suppose it would be probably our marketing flyer, maybe.
Yeah, some of that.
I know we did
Stuff
a
that
TV
really,
thing.
there's marketing stuff that's available that really
Yeah, so-
brings Cressy to the forefront, and everything they're going to do for you, are willing to do for you if they accept you, you know, if they sign a contract as a listing agent or buyer's agent, whatever, yes, there.
Yeah. So Garrett, you won't get it all right at this moment in one big dump of information. Have an ear for it and listen up. And what you need to do when you're out on appointments with both buyers and sellers, right? You are engaging in several things. One is you're a salesperson, right? So you are there to help them get what they want. They have needs and wants and motivations to do things, and you're there to assist them. All right. So you're there to do that. You're also there as a storyteller. You're there to tell people from the very first time you meet with them how this house sale is going to go and how we're going to get them down that path to where they will end up. So how you tell that story and how you intersperse the values that we are going to bring, the valuable tools and systems and services, get to know that. So have an ear for those things as you're learning, and you'll develop the storyline. All right, so 3.5%, not to fall below 2,500. By the way, it is understood that this amount does not include any compensation for buyer broker. So even though we're only negotiating one side, I am having conversations with sellers all the time about the fact that a buyer may come in asking for assistance with their side of the brokerage fee. Okay? Anything else on that? This is a good topic. It's a great topic I could spend a ton more time on about why and how. It's an ongoing discussion, and talk to either me, your manager, your field trainer, all the rest of that. Seller concessions. So that is the assistance with the buyer's closing costs. At this time in taking the listing, the seller's not offering anything out. We're not promoting anything like that. But it doesn't mean they can't agree to it later on. Okay? Commission and attorney fees. So we just collect the commission at closing. If we have to engage an attorney, that's no fun. Earnest money is held in a non-interest-bearing escrow account, so the listing broker will receive the earnest money and hold it there. And it's seen as a deposit. All right, listing services. So I'm relying on what the information that's coming from the seller to be true and accurate as far as the property, in terms of them owning it, to the condition of it, to all of that. So, and then I am going to put all of that information out into the multiple listing service. That includes photographs and descriptions and details about the property. And by the way, once it goes out to the multiple listing service and out to the various websites, that's the genie out of the bottle. There is no pulling that back in. So if I list your property, for instance, and it doesn't sell for some reason, and it expires, and you call me up, and it doesn't happen as much now as it did when things were first really people were getting used to it. They're like, take all of my photos down from Zillow. Yeah, if you think Zillow's going to give up anything because I make a phone call to them, if I could find a telephone number, good luck. But that takes an act of God to get through to them and have them take some of this stuff down. Okay, but if you know of any major defects, any problems, you got to let me know about it. All right? Environmental contaminants, same thing. If there is anything to do with environmental issues, we got to get the experts involved. All right, agency disclosure. I am working for you as a seller's agent. And by the way, line 146 talks about an office policy. We're going to see that here in a minute. So I'm working for you as a seller's agent. And any other agent coming through the door, even if they're with Cressy and Everett, is a buyer's agent. So we're representing each side. The only time our agency relationship changes is if I bring the buyer to the table. Then I am what they call a limited agent. Some places call it dual agency. And so I'm limited about what I can say about one party to another party. For instance, we'll get this question all the time. So a buyer comes through an open house, or they contact me and say, hey, the seller is asking this much, will they accept less? I don't know. Make them an offer and we'll find out, because I can't disclose that a seller will accept less than what they're asking for the property. Likewise, if I have a buyer and I bring to my seller as a limited agent an offer and it's less than what they're asking for the property, and the seller turns to me and says, hey, this isn't what we're looking for, will they pay more? I don't know. Make them a counteroffer and we'll find out. Because I can't disclose, even if I knew, that a buyer would pay more than what they're offering. What motivates a party to buy or sell a property? So if somebody's going through a divorce, if somebody lost a job, if somebody's getting relocated, some of those types of things, you cannot disclose what motivates a party to buy or sell. That gets back to your agency responsibility. Now, in this form, limited agency, all right, so it talks about confidential information, won't be disclosed. However, material facts will be disclosed. Anyways, the seller doesn't always have to agree. I've got it checked that the seller will agree and allow me to work as a limited agent. Not every seller will, all right? Especially attorneys. If you are on the verge of working with an attorney, just be aware that in Law School 101, their first year, they learn very early on that a practicing attorney cannot expect to represent both sides of opposing issue and do so well, right? They have to choose one side or the other. So if you're ever working with an attorney, know that they will probably take exception to this. All right, seller authorization and cooperation. So we're going to put a for sale sign in the yard. Again, I'm going through this document and pointing to key words in here to paraphrase what we're talking about. All right? All right. You will cooperate with brokers getting through the house and contractors and inspectors and all that within reason. We'll talk about how showings work, but within reasonable parameters, you're going to work with people getting in this house. All right? You're going to get me a key to the property, and if I need to, I might have to make a copy of it. All right? You're not going to lease this property out. You're not going to rent it out during our listing contract, all right? And let's see here. Again, I am going to disseminate, publish, and put information into the listing terms and all that into the multiple listing service, photographs, written description. You give me authority to do all of that stuff, all right? Utility information, a lot of buyers may want utility information, so if you could get us that. Homeowners Association, you got to let us know if you belong in a homeowners association, who the contact information is, and the amount of the HOA costs. All right? I'm not hung up on getting their lending institution and mortgage loan number. The title company will ask for that, and we'll get that done soon enough. Seller does authorize me to disclose the existence of multiple offers because, so if we get multiple offers, you're saying, hey, let everybody know that we've got multiple offers. We're not going to disclose what the details are, but we're going to let them know that there is more than one offer on the table. And is the seller, yes or no, offering a home warranty? So the purchase agreement was a buyer asking for a home warranty, but in this case, it is a seller offering one. Locksbox use. So going to put a lockbox on the property, and we're going to put the key or the front door code inside the lockbox. Seller's going to safeguard their valuables, that sort of stuff, so it's their responsibility. Everything from medications, special medications, to jewelry and valuables, to firearms, anything like that, you've got to secure it. We're not responsible for that. All right? And as far as accessing the lockbox and authorizing, showing the house, if it is vacant, you know, usually we don't need each and every time somebody wants to see the house, the seller to say, yes, that's okay, because it's empty. Now, if they have a family there or they live there, they have pets, whatever the case is, we might need to know each and every time that it's okay to come through at a given time. Recordings of properties. So I talked about a buyer's agent recording at a property. Well, sellers have cameras too. And we're just asking that everybody be prudent about how they transmit those recordings, what they do with them. On a personal nature, they're meant for the sale of the real estate. Fair housing. This house is being offered out to anyone, regardless if they're in a protected class. Additional provisions. They're receiving a copy of this. So remember, anybody that signs a document, if they're a party to that and they sign it, they ought to receive a copy of it, either digitally or in paper.
I mean, is there a time frame that they have to receive it? I did a module that said that it's received like as soon as they sign it, but are we able to go back and send them a copy?
Yeah. I would just get in the practice of providing them. And so sometimes, you know, up until recently, and I would say still, I will print 2 copies of things, right? And I will have that available if I'm going out to a meeting. Sometimes I say, do you want me to leave you with a copy, or do you want me to scan in the ones that I've got here? And sometimes they say, hey, just send me digital copies. But you got to remember to send them copies. All right, anybody that signs a document ought to receive a copy of it.
That's if they manually sign, but with the dot loop, is it electronically signed?
Great question, Betty Jean. So if somebody digitally signs through dot loop, somewhere in their inbox between the Ethernet and in their inbox, they have a copy somewhere. They may not be very well versed because they're new to the system on how to access that. So what I do generally is after everything is signed, I create a PDF and shoot it back to them in a regular email and just say, hey, here are your documents. Particularly, for instance, if they have gotten together a purchase agreement and they're a buyer, right? So now they signed it digitally, maybe the last counteroffer, but where's the original purchase agreement and any other documents, stuff like that. So I package it up and I send out an email in the title, the address, and I say purchase docs, and I say this is what your lender is going to be looking for. I have it all put together in one spot for you. Well, you're providing a service to people. Now, if they have a pre-approval with a lender, I am not going to make the assumption that I am going to automatically send those documents to that lender, even if it's somebody I know and as a friend, and they took me up on the recommendation I gave, for instance. Because remember, they have 5 days to make loan application. And if they are a shrewd buyer, they might be shopping around interest rates and closing costs. So they might say, take that 5 days to go to, yep, the first, second, third lender until they find the deal they want. So I have been caught where I sent a purchase agreement making the assumption they were going to go with the lender that the pre-approval was with. And they're like, no, we're looking around. We're going to maybe go with somebody else. And then I had to backtrack and say to that lender, hey, I'm sorry, but they're not yet committed to you. So I would never send that off to a lender without their permission first. Most of the time they're like, yeah, save me the hassle of having to do that if you could send it. But I get that in writing from them. All right, let's see here. All these pages constitute one contract. I can recommend you, just like the other one, to service professionals and providers and vendors, but you are free to choose whomever you want. All right? I am not charged with the responsibility in custody management and care maintenance and protection of your home. Yes, my sign's in the yard. This is still your home. All right? So, therefore, I am not shoveling snow. All right? And I am not mowing the lawn. Just like the guy on the survey that I talked about earlier, right? If the seller has a house for sale and they move out of town and they forget to line up the lawn care, who is the neighbor going to call? Are they going to call their neighbor, the people that they know, hopefully something about it? No. They're going to call the guy whose name is in the yard, right? And say, you be the bad guy and tell those people they need to mow their lawn or something like that. Now, does that mean that if I know I've got showings on a house this afternoon and it just snowed a foot last night, I don't have a shovel in my car? You bet I do. And I'm going to go because I want this house to sell. And if I can shovel a little path up to the doorway and it's safety and it's also, you know, getting people more comfortable getting into the house, I'm going to do that. But up front, I am letting sellers know it is still your responsibility to arrange for the snow removal guy and the lawn care guy and all the rest of that. All right. Again, they agreed to work with me through email, text messages, and so forth, wire fraud, further conditions if there is any, and then the seller signed here and the managing broker signs there. Listing agreement. Any questions on that? All right, I hope you get many of those. Here again is the seller's disclosure form. We already kind of went through this. The seller is to fill this out, and they may need a little guidance, right? Not in what way to go with it, but you know, are the structures connected to the public water system? Well, of course, the structure is the house, right? And so that may be a yes or no. If yes, have the improvements, all right? So the improvement is the house. And so there may just need to be some clarification questions more so than specifically answering what, you know, does the structure have aluminum wiring? So that really came around in the 70s. Like if anybody knows where River Commons is by the lake in Clay Township, or the river. So they used aluminum wiring in those houses, and so on. Okay. Lead-based paint. So this is the lead-based paint form that a seller, if it was built before 78, they've got to fill this one out. All right, so a seller is going to choose one or the other of these. All right, so anything built before 78 has the potential of lead-based paint being used in it. So there is known lead-based paint. So seller's disclosure. Seller knows of lead-based paint in the house, or seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint in the house. You're going to check one or the other of those. And then seller has provided the buyer with all available records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint. Seller has no records or reports pertaining to lead-based paint in the house. Okay. Now, I will tell you, having seen many of these, well, let me just go on a little bit further. This is where the buyer acknowledges receipt of the copies here. This pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead-Based Paint in the Home. So you've got to provide the buyer with this pamphlet. It's in .loop. You can send it to them digitally. All right. We also have paper copies upstairs. And then they can either take 10 days to think about doing a mutually agreed upon period for lead-based paint testing, or they're going to waive that off. This is where the listing broker, all right, has to let the seller know of their obligation that if they know of lead-based paint in the house, they have to disclose it. And this is the one form that the brokers do sign, and this would be you as the agent, all right? So you are on this one as well. Now, I was made aware recently of something, a story, where you will find oftentimes, because so many people, so many sellers, when given the choice to say, and there is no lead-based paint in the house, or seller has no lead-based paint in the house. All right, so a couple of things. One, that previous document, this seller's disclosure form, this is not a warranty for the buyer. This is not a guarantee to the buyer. What this is what does the seller know about the property? What do you know? Tell us what you know. Doesn't mean there can't be something going on behind the walls that you're unaware of, right? So tell us what you know. And the same goes with this. And I will say that I see many of these forms, and oftentimes the seller says, yeah, it was built before 78. There could have been lead-based paint in the house, but I have no knowledge of it, and I've never had any reports or records pertaining to lead-based paint in the house. So most of the time, you see that double I checked on both of those, all right? An agent sometimes will get ahead of themselves, and assuming that that is the seller's answer, you'll oftentimes see check marks here put there by the machinery, not by somebody's hand, right? So they will automatically, for whatever reason, occasionally you'll see that agents will fill that in. And because they already know, most of the time, that's what a seller is going to say. So they just save the time of them having to check the boxes. Somebody let me in recently on a story where a young couple bought a house, and both of those boxes were checked. And just before they were about ready to give birth to their new child, their first, they had the county out to just check to see if there was lead, surfaces in the house, paint. And the county health department, or whoever the rep was, came out and said, yeah, I was in this house about 3 months ago. And I told them they have lead in this house. And I gave them the documentation on it. Yet the seller had said no. And I don't have all the details, but I have a feeling because the broker was found complicit in it as well. They had a suit filed against them as well. And I think it's because they automatically checked this box, all right, thinking that's what the seller was going to say. So the buyer bought it thinking, oh, they don't have any knowledge of lead-based paint, when in fact they did have knowledge. And everybody signed it. So don't pre-fill, do not answer for your clients. Homeowner's disclosure. So that listing agreement, if you remember, had HOA information on it. I am now filling this out with every listing, whether it's got an HOA or not. Because what neighborhoods do you guys live in? You don't live in the neighborhood, you live out in the country, so do you.
But I live in Bluebird Acres,
Bluebird Acres.
which doesn't have an HOA.
Did it
But
ever have an HOA?
There actually was, that was never officially set up. However, he died and the son took over. And a few years ago, we all had to get an attorney because he wanted to make us all follow that HOA that was originally made but not officially on the books.
Right.
So our whole little community had to chip in for an attorney. And
To say you didn't want the HOA? All right.
And then a lot of them dropped out because, the price kept going up every time we had to go to court. And they're like, oh, just let the chips fall where they fall. So it
Yeah.
ended up just being 9 of us to pay the entire attorney fee for the whole little neighborhood. But when we bought the house, we were told, there's an HOA fee or an HOA that's on file. There's no fee. It's never been enforced. It's been there. It's like 30 years ago. Nothing.
That's a perfect example right there. So rather than me as the agent say to people, there is no HOA, don't worry about it, I now have the buyer and seller engage in this document, which is the right thing to do. Is there or is there not? If there is none, then have the seller write in none, all right? But rather than it be on me to tell people whether there is or not, for that exact reason, I'm going to let them tell each other. Okay? Any questions on that? Because you get into certain neighborhoods where there is definitely an active HOA, everybody knows it. And then there's others where, yeah, there once was, but then the first person put up an above ground pool and then they put in a shed and then everybody just said, there must not be an active HOA. But there could be for that reason. All right, agency relationship, Indiana office policy. So we do have this document, and this spells out not only our agency relationships, both buyers and sellers, as well as limited agency. It also spells out that $295 broker administrative commission that comes involved. So there's a variable rate to the commission. That's the percentage that goes up and down depending on how much the percentage is and the value of the house, plus the stationary or static $295. The company gets $195 of that, and you as the agent get $100 of that. All right. If you want to do somebody a favor by reducing something, friend or family or something like that, you are welcome to knock $100 off of that because that's your $100. But the $195 sticks.
And we have to fill out this form even if we have it in the ERA or the listing.
Right. So what, page 12?
This is the one we were asking.
Yes.
12. Okay. So let's listen to what Garrett just said, right? Even though it's in here, right? Right? So agency disclosure is in here, but it says, seller acknowledges receipt and copy of written office policy regarding, so that's what that document is. The purchase agreement and the buyer representation agreement have that exact same verbiage in there. So we've got to have, until they change things up, and I'm with you, I think it's redundant, they've already covered it, but that is the office policy. And you can find that in .loop. Okay, MLS waiver. Again, we're taking a listing. Thanks for being here, Betty Jane. You've been a lot of help. I'm glad you made it. No, I'm glad you're here. Fantastic. So MLS waiver, what this states is I am taking a listing, but in here in Indiana, we have to have our listings entered into the MLS and live within, I think it's 24-hour period of time. All right, so I take a listing today. By the rules, I've got to have it in the system by tomorrow. Well, I don't even have photos done yet, and I don't have the description put together, and the seller's still doing a thing or two. So I have them under contract. We have an active listing agreement, but we're not ready to go live. And I might say we're going to keep it out of the MLS temporarily until either this date or until one day after photos are taken or something like that. So why is that? And you say to yourself, well, why don't you just hold off taking the listing formally until they're ready to go? I've got the photos and I've got and they're ready to go. Had an instance where a gal that owns a property, she lives in Seattle and her kid was at Notre Dame and he was graduating and it was time for them to let go of the property. All right, that's fine. I'd be happy to help you out. Is on the north here on Twickenham. She says, but as college students tend to be, they've been pretty hard on the property and we need some work to be done on it. That's fine, but she's out in Seattle and she needs help. So, well, I've got some contractors I can call and I'll meet over there and I'll get you quotes. So we did that, and painter and flooring and handyman and this and that. And she was very appreciative of me getting her all that information. And so I'm just kind of from afar watching trucks in the driveway and watching as things go. A little bit time goes by. And next thing you know it, some other agent's sign goes up in the yard. And I'm like, what the heck? and somebody had reached out to her, probably cut her a better deal or something like that, and I'm out, even though I organized all of that stuff for her to do that. So, lesson is, if I'm going to go to the extent of turning you on to all my contractors and getting some work done, which, by the way, I'm not a general contractor, I'm not going to oversee it. You are going to be responsible for being contractually engaged with these people, agreeing to pay, all the rest of that stuff. But if I'm going to do some work for you, we're going to be under contract. I'm going to make an arrangement for me to get paid, even if you're not ready to go live today. So therefore, I'm going to waive us off the MLS until you're a little bit closer in. All right?
This form only has 3 weeks though. I just did one recently and Donna investigated it for me and she came back and said that the MLS says, or IRMLS or whoever says that you can only date it out 3 weeks.
Okay, yeah. I wouldn't pay attention to that. I hear what she's saying. So the furthest distance you can have from signing a contract to holding it out of the MLS is 3 weeks. I would say just get it under contract and then we'll deal with that and we can extend it or whatever. But prevent from what that I just talked to you about happening. All right. Okay, so I think that's the MLS waiver. This is the marketing form for the office that you just do what you can, list date, price, MLS number, commission, clients. Again, we have had people that have found themselves in the hospital. We've had agents that have disappeared on us that I had to get into the file and contact people. And everything you have in dotloop, whether you generate it, create it in dotloop, or you bring it in from outside by way of your email or you scan it, that is the folder. That is the manila folder that we keep all the documents in. And as the broker, we're responsible for that. So we are kindly asking you to infill that with all the information. All right, pending progress sheet. You saw this last round. So this time you are on the other side of the equation. Nothing new there. Sometimes, so we saw an amendment to the purchase agreement. Sometimes you have to amend the listing contract. All right, so what might be amending that? Sometimes we have to, this is what we call a price change or a price adjustment. We are moving it from $260 to $250. We're extending the contract. So our listing was about to expire and we went from the 20th day to July to the 30th day of August. Anything else that we might have to change to amend the listing contract? Okay. Counteroffers, we talked about that. By the way, yeah. So I'll make mention of this again. Whatever we put in the counteroffer, all other terms and conditions of previous purchase agreement and all previous counteroffers shall remain in effect as modified. Sometimes you'll go counteroffer, 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 and you'll be back and forth 4 times, right? What agents might say as we get near the end of that, we finally get it resolved is, hey, let's clean this whole thing up and put all the changes on one fresh purchase agreement and ditch all these counteroffers. If that's the case, great, do that. It makes the whole thing cleaner, but do it fast because until everybody is signed on everything, an offer can come in from left field, anything can happen, people can change their mind. So get it done, but sometimes you'll find if you have multiple counteroffers, an agent will recommend that we just clean it up in one place. All right, request your commission check. This is when you're on your way to closing. The top part is if it's your listing. Amendment to purchase agreement. We talked about those. Seller's inspection response. So this is where the buyer makes a request and seller comes back. And I remember I told you that in the counteroffer, all previously agreed to terms stick except what's changed in this one. That is not the case when it comes to these inspection going back and forth. All right? So you have to restate each and every time the things that will be done. You're not relying on bits and pieces from previous ones. All right, we're getting near the end. request for extension of time for inspection response. So again, you saw this previously, but this time it is the seller saying, hey, I need more time to respond to your request because I got to get quotes. I got to get ideas on what this is going to take. All right. So listing contract for unimproved property. This is the raw land. Okay. So know that there is a separate document if you're talking just land.
Is there like a significant difference, or?
There's enough of one. If I'm selling land or a lot, I'll use that unimproved versus the residential. And there's a separate contract for commercial too. So just be aware, if you are talking commercial, go to somebody that knows something before you just dive into thinking you could take that on by yourself. And then sometimes there's a mutual release from listing contract. Sometimes for whatever reason, a listing agent and a seller just don't get along and they want out of it for whatever reason, or they're taking the house off the market. So the key term here, two key terms that I want you to highlight. Under A is the word release, and under B is the word withdraw. So there's a big difference between those two. A release says we have a contract together and we are tearing up that contract. We are free to go our own ways and do our own thing. A withdraw says, hey, it's the holidays. The house hasn't sold and I don't want people tromping through over the holidays, so I just want to take the house off the market. Or, hey, we've gotten so much feedback on the bathroom needing remodeling that we're going to take the house off the market and do the remodeling, and then we'll go back. So that's a withdraw. That just says at any time the seller can take a step back and say, I no longer want to show the property, we've changed our mind, or something like that. So anytime they can get a withdraw. A release means we are totally free to do whatever we want. List with another owner, go for sale by owner, anything like that. I had a seller once. I was working very hard. It wasn't a hot market. And, they were moving to South Carolina. They were in healthcare. She was going to be a nurse down there. So after about 4 weeks of open houses and promoting this thing and doing everything I can, I get a call from them and said, hey, Quinn, we've changed our mind. We're no longer moving. We need you to take the house off the market. And so we did a release on that. Say, okay, they changed their mind. They're no longer going. I found it odd because they were really determined that they were going to go. So we did that. I pulled the signs. I get the key box, all the rest of that. And then about, a couple days later, I get a call from an appraiser. It says, how do I get into the property? It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, no, I've been contacted the bank to do an appraisal for a loan on this thing, right? So what they had done is they found, somehow somebody contacted them, went around me, and said, let's put something together without your agent and we'll all save on the commission. And then they gave me the sob story that they were, and I let them off the hook. And I am still bitter about that one, right? Now, had I checked the box that says withdraw, they would have still owed me the commission. But because we did the release, they were free to do what they wanted to do. Everybody understand that? Okay.
After the fact, since then found out that it wasn't a withdrawal more than a release, are you able to go?
Not real. It would have been way easier if I had, under withdraw, if I said, you do what you want, you still owe me a commission, though, because that contract is still intact. When you release the contract, people are free to do what they want. So if you come to me with this form, a mutual release from listing contract, I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and especially if it's a case where we're releasing them. All right. Last but not least, and we're almost done, is the seller's net equity worksheet. All right. So when you are with a seller, all right, you can talk about a million different things. All right. But at the end of the day, what they care most about is what they are going to walk away with. What is my bottom line number? What am I going to walk away with? And that's where this form comes into play. This is a great form. It does what I just described to you. You have all of this paperwork that we just went through, and of all of the pages that you leave with them or provide them an email, this is the one they will go back to the most, because this is what tells them what they can go on and do with their lives. They have an idea of going on and moving on to another house. They're getting a divorce, and they're both walking away with something. And this is part of that nest egg. It's an estate, and each heir is going to get so much. Everybody is concerned with what the bottom line number is. So what I do is, when I am at a listing appointment, we're going through the paperwork. I go through all of that, the seller's disclosure. I go through this, that, and the other thing, the lead-based paint, all that. And I say, how would you like to go through this? This is a great worksheet. And what it does is it lets you know what you're going to walk away with, because everybody has in their mind closing costs, right? I have a general idea. This is going to spell it out. And you may not be very well versed in doing these yet, but you ought to get there. Now, ways that you can get there. If, let's say, for instance, I work through Meridian Title. Every title company is going to have a website where you can go to, punch in the sale price. They are going to chuck out a bunch of numbers, and it's going to be branded to them, and it's going to make some assumptions. You're going to input some things, but it's going to do all the calculations for you. So yes, you can go in ahead of time and make an assumption on what number to put in there and come in and just lay that down on the table, because the title company did it all for you. That's one way to do it, and agents do that around the office. I get it. But an experienced agent knows that this document really is in the toolbox of sales tools, is one of the most important, valuable ones you can get. So I've given you kind of a, this is, by the way, all of this is in .loop. So you can customize this to your people. You can change the numbers on it. And so when I'm sitting down with someone, this is a good example of how it looks when I'm done, and I'm done scratching it up. So I say to them, okay, we went through the market analysis. We talked about pricing. What do you think? Where do you want to be? We talked about a listing price, but now we got to get down to a selling price. That may be the listing price. There may be some negotiations. And because the amounts here will change depending on what price we sell it for, we got to come up with a number. Now, they may hem-haw around. They might say, okay, well, just put in what we're asking for it. Okay, I'll do that. Or, you know, we're agreeing that we might have to come down a little bit. So we'll agree to that. By the way, this is just a document for our use. This is not going to commit you to anything. It's not going to be shared with anybody else. But it gives us an idea. So I go through and I say, okay, the title company has title insurance, and that's about $1,200. This is the one number that we used to get a printed rate card on. Every title company used to give us a rate card, and we could say, okay, based on the sale price, if I work my way over, this is the amount of title insurance. You may have to look that up. I can guesstimate some of this stuff, and I guess high. And so that way I hopefully won't disappoint them when it comes in less than that. Deed preparation is an attorney, so I usually do 100 now on that. So we prepare a new deed. There is no longer, this one's from 2022, this example, but I do a lot of these. Water certification fee, that's no longer the case. Personal marketing fee. So in this case, we did it for 6.5, and now that's been broken up into two different ones. You'll see on the example right here. All right, so now we have the commission here, but I also have now a new line down here, seller contribution to buyer agent commission. All right, so I'm prepping them for that. Okay, they decline the home warranty. That closing fee, remember I talked about the closing fee versus closing costs, right? And so that's $425 split, 50-50, that's about that. TIF and recording fees, so I just worked in $100 for that. Cressy and Everett's, $295. Title company has a processing fee of $200. Miscellaneous and repairs, I put in $1,000 for that. put in a question mark. If we don't need 1,000 in repairs, we won't use it. If we go over 1,000, then we go over 1,000. But let's just work something in. Seller contribution to buyer's closing costs. So I've addressed that in this session, right? So that may come in. And I said, hey, it could be $1,200 to $3,000 in this case. And then I also, on my newer version, address the seller contribution to buyer's closing costs and seller contribution to buyer agent commission. So I go through all of that math. This should be scratched out of here right now. And I come down with this. From the top is that. I have to work in some tax proration. Remember, I went through that. I'm not going to calculate the actual taxes. I'm going to take 1 year and round it up. I'm going to go up a bit. And then I'm also going to find out what their payoff is for their loan. All right, so most people have a general idea on what their payoff is. And then I'm going to get on down here to the net due to seller. And that is always an eye-opener for them because that is what they're going to need to move forward with their lives. And if that will work. Now, I do that when I list a property and I have them sign it. I also do it when we receive an offer, especially if it's different than what I ran the original net sheet is. So I think you have an obligation to go through the seller's costs and get a reasonable idea on what they could walk away with. And then when they do receive an offer, if it's much different, we'll go through this exercise again. You'll get good at doing it, and then that'll help them in making their decision. All right?
Why is there two titles? Oh, so there's one fee for the title company to run all the, to look through the, do research on the data, and then there's one for insuring the title.
Yeah, so this is the title insurance, and I've lumped this together. They break it out on the net sheet. They break it out by saying, the insurance is one cost, but they also charge for the examination fee, a search and exam fee, and then, some kind of recording fee and that sort of stuff. So I lump all of those fees together and call it one. All right. That's it. So we got started. We took up some of your lunchtime, but that's about it. I'm happy to stick around and go through any of this in greater detail if I've not bored you too much.